Hi, Anita. This is your cousin, Marjorie Lucy Irvin Regan. Very excited about your wedding in 2 weeks, and very happy that you asked me to make this video of your family. And now I want to show you, I'm going to go back and we're going to start with your great great grandmother. But before that, I want to show you your place in the whole family and give you an idea, and whoever you want to watch this with you or whatever. Oh, and also to let Rick know what he's getting in for. Anita, you're part of a large family. Here you go. Here you are. There's Aunt Nora. That's my mother's sister. Here's my cousin Fred, your grandfather. And here's your mother, Gail. And here's your father, Ray. And there's you and your brother, and then your brother's family there. And now I'm going to be drawing a line. I'm going to wait 2 weeks over to you and Rick. And I do wish you much happiness together. I think you're going to continue your 20-year partnership already. Okay, but now I'm going to go back to the beginning. Okay, so my grandfather, your great great grandfather, emigrated here in about 1887. If you look up the 1890 and the 1900 census, you will find him listed and his wife, and then Uncle Bill and Aunt Nora. So all right, so the whole over thing is like that generation, my grandparents. Um, this is my father's family then. Like, here's my father and here's my mother. And my mother was sister to Aunt Nora, your great grandmother. So, okay, so we start with John. He emigrates to New York City, gets off the boat, walks right over to Greenwich Village. At that time, Ellis Island hadn't opened yet. I think that might have been after 1890. I don't know the exact date. Anyway, so he's living in Greenwich Village, New York City. Now, his landlady, a woman named Mrs. Troy, she rented out rooms in her house to Irish immigrants that were coming into the United States. And she was influential in his life. Like, she wrote, he left behind his wife and a baby son, and she was pregnant. And so the baby son died. That was John Joseph. You notice the similar names, John Ty, John Joseph. He died, and Uncle Bill was born. You may have heard about Uncle Bill or met him, but you know that he and their younger brother, Jack, who's over here, were both fought in World War I and World War II. Bill was in the Army, Jack was in the Navy, and he was a simple young sailor. And then he was, they were both wounded in the First World War, and he was sent to the convalescent home in Culpeper, Virginia. And that's where he met Mary, who became his wife. And Johnny died a couple of years ago. He was a pilot for United, and when he retired, he did those Mercy flights, piloting planes with medical personnel in emergency situations. And then he has a whole string of grandchildren. And anyway, Mary is still alive, Mary Teresa, so she's my first cousin. Okay, and then Aunt Margie never had any children. Here's my mother. My mother had the four of us. Francis died in the flu epidemic. And then I want to emphasize more this part of the family because this is where your family is from. Down here is my husband, his family, and then my family of origin, and that's all over there. So we won't go into that. But we'll go back to here's your grandmother. So she's there in England. They both had gone from Ireland to England because there were more jobs there for them, and they both worked in England. And she got a letter from Mrs. Troy, his landlady, saying, "You better come to the United States now because your husband is drinking and it's not good. He's not doing well without you." So she gets on a boat with this baby, Uncle Bill, and you remember, I don't know, you probably remember the stories about he was very annoyed with them that they let him be born in England. He did not like the English, as many of us Irish, resented their control. Anyway, so she and the baby get on the boat, and they get off right where he did, and she walked to the rooming house where he was, and then that straightened out the family, and then they went on to have these 5 children. And then, unfortunately, our great grandmother got cancer, and she was only 41 when she died. And Uncle Jack he was pretty young, and he got and Bridget married Dixon Ty. Ty was her married name. Dixon was her maiden name. And we still have cousins there in Ireland, and most of you met Mary and Willie that came to this country about every 2 years on family vacations and went to Florida to the Disney place and all those places in Florida, and then they came to New York too, and we met them a few times in the city when they would be here. So they're wonderful, all those Irish cousins. But she was one of 4 girls, and they had one brother. But her sister, 2 stayed in Ireland, and 1 came to the United States, and she married a miner, also an Irishman, in Pennsylvania. I just read this book that a lot of Irish ended up in the mines in Pennsylvania when the work in New York City at the docks dwindled. And there was a lot of famine, well, before they came, actually, more like in the late 1840s. But anyway, things were not good in Ireland, and that's why they went to England, and then that's why they came here. So by the time they came, things were a little better than they had been in the immigrants that came around 1850. Anyway, her older sister Maggie said to the family, to her husband, "Let us take Jack. He's so little. His mother has died. We could care for him a few years, and then the family, he could come back to the family." Well, they took him, but they right away changed his name to Quinn. Her sister Maggie had no children, and that's why they took him, and he became their only child. They changed his name to John Joseph Quinn. Well, he was still Jack, and then he when the father died, that would be your great-great-grandfather, Jack was sent to the funeral. He was an adult by then, a young adult, maybe 16, something like that. He came to the funeral, and Uncle Bill was so angry that he had never been told that this was his real family, not Aunt Maggie. And at the funeral, Uncle Bill told Jack, "You're really my brother, you're not my cousin." And of course, that was a whole big thing. But anyway, he did stay close to us. I remember when I was a child, he would bring his 2 children and his wife sometimes, but every year he made the trip to New York City. He stayed in Culpeper, Virginia. Remember, after the World War I, he had gone there to heal up from his wounds. He became a plumber and stayed in Culpeper his whole life. Okay, but anyway, I need to get back to your grandmother, your great great grandmother, Aunt Nora. So you know Aunt Nora married very young, and my mother said that her parents said she was too flirty and too beautiful a girl, so they made sure she got married at 16, and then her husband, he had a business. My mother called it a roadhouse. I think it was like the equivalent of a tavern, and he owned that, but it was mortgaged to his family, and he had a house which was also mortgaged to his family, and that comes into it later. So they're married, and then actually had 7 children, um, and of course then Alfie and Bud and Marguerite, and then Fred, your grandfather, um, and so Fred marries Ella, a wonderful woman, and then he has Freddie, who's still alive, your cousin, um, and then he has your aunts Elaine and Beverly, and then Gail, your mother, and then your mother marries Ray and has you and Ray has other children, and now you, Anita, right there, are marrying Rick, um, which is very nice. So here's, all our other cousins. Dawn and Joan are large because they were both born the same year as me, between 1930 and 1931. The three of us were born. I was the oldest. And so we stayed close our whole life. Actually, it was, well, let's see. Oh, I wanted to go back to the flu epidemic of 1919. Fred, the husband, dies, and here's Aunt Nora left with the 4 children alive. The baby died, and those other 2 children had like infant and young children, like 3 or 4 years old, in accidents earlier and were already deceased. But then the baby dies and her husband dies, and she's sick, and the 4 of them are all sick in that house. And friends of the family named Margaret and Fred Johnson, no, I think it was Sam Johnson, they come into the house. They don't catch the flu. They take that risk, though, and they take care of Nora and the 4 children, and they all get better. And then his family, who holds the mortgage on the house and the mortgage on the business, tell her that she can have the house until the youngest child is 18. So that was like difficult. I don't know anything about them, or just that I know it was very difficult times. And the first time I ever remember seeing Aunt Nora was when I was about 5 years old, before my brother was born. And my mother and I went down to Asbury Park. My mother, let's see, I was born in 1930. In 1934, my mother moved up to the city where Uncle Bill and Aunt Margie lived, and they said that my father could, it was the Depression then in the 30s, that he could get work there. And my mother and father hated to leave Asbury and live in an apartment in New York City, because my mother used to grow flowers outside of her house in Asbury. And my mother had grown up in the city in Greenwich Village, but she loved being in the country and being in her own house. So that was quite a change to come up here. And every year, I mean, I was only 4 at the time, but they said that we were moving back to Asbury next year, but then we never did, and I got married out of my mother's house when I was 23. So, and my mother, my mother was a lovely woman, and she had the one older sister, your great grandmother, and then of course you had, let's see if I got this right. Yeah, Nora is your grandmother because he's, wait a minute. Yeah, Fred was your grandfather and Ella was your grandmother, but then your great-grandmother was Aunt Nora, who, we were very close. My mother was very close to her brother Bill and Aunt Nora and Aunt Margie. Um, but when my mother's mother, Bridget, died, my mother was 16 and Margie was 12, and I think it impacted both of them the most. But my mother did not want to stay home and get bossed by Bill and Nora, so she got a job outside of the home, and she lived there a few months, and then she came home. She did, it wasn't, she didn't really like it. But she was independent, I guess maybe that's my point. So, Anita, I don't know what else you want to know about the family, and how long did I take so far?
15.
15 minutes?
Yep.
Oh, that's not so bad. Let's see, what can I tell you? Well, your that's your great-great-grandmother. This is your great-great-great-grandmother. And she must have been a pretty a smart woman, because she was delivering babies. She was like a midwife in that Greenwich Village area, and sometimes she would take my mother with her. There weren't automobiles yet. There was like trolleys that were pulled by horses, and they were like on tracks, and that was the transportation. Horse-drawn trolleys, and so my mother went with her sometimes. And my mother thought about being a nurse, but then she changed her mind, and it didn't appeal to her. Oh, because she had Florence then, and she would have had to leave Florence, probably with Aunt Nora or something like that, to take the nurse's training. This one doctor that she had helped him or something, and he wanted her to go for nurse's training, but she decided not to. She didn't want to leave Florence. So, I don't know. There's so much else about the family, but I don't know how far into it you want to go. I don't know. Well, let's go back over to Leon. That was a very sad time when Leon died. Leon had cancer. I remember coming down to that funeral, and I did have I have that other picture. Well, you have that picture too of all of them when they were at Alfie's wedding. Alfie was a little older when he got married, and he married a woman named Catherine, and it was shortened to Kit, and she had two children from her first marriage, and they became our cousins also, Dolly and Buddy. I was a bridesmaid at Dolly's wedding. I was a bridesmaid at Dawn's wedding. She was Marguerite's oldest girl. Oh, and I should mention Joan's sister Lois, who is still with us. These are Lois's children down here. I thought this would be much longer, but anyway. I think I'll end it there, Anita. And you could tell me, I can always add on or make another video. You know my sister Florence, that might be of interest, married your your grandmother Ella's brother, Bobby Bolton. There he is. And of course the X's mean that they're deceased. A little cross would have been nice. But anyway. Yeah, Nora had a short marriage and then lived a long time just raising those children. And she had to give the house back when Fred turned 18, so it wasn't easy for her. And then she met Harry, and then they got married in 1950, it says there. I remember going to that wedding. Well, have a happy wedding, a fun day, and many blessings. And that's all for now. And I'll see you soon, Anita. Goodbye.